If you want your videos to go from this to this, keep watching. A common question I get from clients and viewers is, how do you create that really cool looking blurry background in your videos? In this video, I'm gonna show you the right way to do it, because there is a wrong way. So sure, there's software and webcams out there that claim they can get the blurry background, or like really cheesy looking, like the Zoom background. It doesn't look good. But the truth is, nothing really can come close to the real thing, which is using a decent camera with a nice lens. Now I say nice, but that doesn't mean it has to be cinema quality. You don't have to spend thousands of dollars to achieve this look. It does require an investment, but if quality is important to you, then it's a worthwhile investment. The camera is an important piece of the equation, although it's actually not the most important piece. But when it comes to the camera, you gotta make sure that it has interchangeable lenses so that you can get the perfect lens for your situation. My go-to camera is the Sony ZV-E10, and I'll put a link in the description for that. Now, I already did another video on that, so if you want more info about why I love that camera and actually why I use it for these videos, then go check that video out after this one. What I would say is the most important factor is the lens. Now, you can have just a decent camera with a really top quality lens, and it's gonna look way better than a really high-end camera with a junky lens every time. You could have a cinema camera with just a junky lens, but it won't look as good as even a consumer or like prosumer camera with a nice lens. So when it comes to the lens, the most important factor on that lens is the f-stop, or the aperture. I don't wanna get nerdy on any of this stuff. There's a lot of videos out there that go into it in more depth, but it really doesn't matter. You don't need to know all the science behind it. All you need to know is that the aperture is like the iris of the lens, like the iris of your eyeball. And when it gets bigger, it lets in more light. And the lens is the same way. As the aperture, that number gets lower, that means the aperture can get wider. I don't know why it's backwards. There's probably some reason, but it doesn't matter. Just know that the lower the number is, the wider the lens can go, and that lets in more light. So that can be great if you're in a low light situation. The other benefit is that a low aperture equals a shallow depth of field, which means there's just a smaller sliver of what's in focus, and everything else goes out of focus. And the further things are away, the more out of focus they become. Typically, we want to find a lens that goes down to a 1.4 f-stop, or aperture, if you can afford it. Those are usually a little more expensive than maybe a 1.8, and 1.8 is still pretty good. You can still get a nice blurry background with a 1.8. Some lenses only go down to a 2.8, especially if you get some zoom lenses. Usually there are some zooms that go lower, but a lot of them only go to 2.8, and you can still get some blur in the background with a 2.8, but it definitely is noticeable between a 1.4 for sure, and even between a 1.8 and a 2.8. So I usually recommend a 1.4 or a 1.8 f-stop. The other key factor here with the lens is the focal length. Now, again, I don't want to get super nerdy with this. If you want to know the science, you can find another video that goes into more detail. But what's really important to know is that the higher the focal length, that's the millimeter. You'll see a number and then mm. So like a 35 mm is a 35 millimeter. The higher the number, the more zoomed in it is. And the lower the number, the wider it is, or the more zoomed out it is. We usually call that wide. Now, what we want to do is find the highest focal length that works for your space. Generally speaking, the image quality is just a little bit better at those higher focal lengths, but at some point it becomes too zoomed in and then it just won't work for your space. So typically when I'm working with clients to help get their office set up, we usually end up on a 16 or a 24, sometimes a 35 millimeter, just depending on how much space they have to work with. But the 16 to 24 is really common. I'll link to some options in the description. Just make sure you get one that works with your camera if you're not going to get the ZV-E10, because lenses are not interchangeable between brands unless you get an adapter, and even then sometimes they don't work great, especially the autofocus. Sometimes the autofocus is really quirky with an adapter to a different brand, or just doesn't work at all. Now, if you're not sure which one you want to go with, what I usually recommend people doing is get the 16 to 50 millimeter zoom lens, or it's called like the kit lens. So if you buy that camera, get it with the kit lens, and then what you can do is zoom in so that it's perfect for your setup, and it'll show you the number of what it zoomed into, and then just buy the best lens you can afford that's close to that number. The next key factor in getting that blurry background is the distance between you and the background, as well as the distance between you and the camera. So what I always recommend is put yourself as close to the camera as possible while you still like the frame and how it looks, but as far away from the background as possible, as long as you don't have stuff in the shot that you don't want in the shot. So you have to play with that. Get the camera set up to where you like what's in the frame. The frame is just what you can see in the camera. It's the setup and composition of where everything's at on the screen. So once you have everything in the frame that you like, then you can play with how close you are to the camera, the more distance you have between you and the background, the blurrier the background is going to be. And then also here's where the focal length of your lens comes into play. Usually a higher focal length just looks better and you have a little bit more blurriness in the background. Now, a pro tip, if you're in kind of a smaller space and you need a little bit more distance, try moving the camera so that you're filming at an angle. So even in my setup here, what I've done is I've moved the camera off a little bit. It's not totally angled like diagonal across the room, but it's not straight on in the room either. So it's just slightly to the side and it's created a lot more depth in the shot. Friend, I hope you found that helpful. Now, I actually help people set this up for their home studios. If you're needing a little bit more support and figuring all this stuff out, I got you. I actually have a free training that I created that walks you through a lot of this stuff, walks you through the lights that you need, where to position things, cameras, audio, all sorts of things. So if you need that, go to glacierrockmedia.com/studio and grab that today. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I did a video on the ZV-E10. So if you want to check that out, you can click here and go watch that next.